Welcome to Mission Unstoppable. I'm your host, Frankie Picasso, and today I have another unstoppable guest with me. You know, it was 2004 when I was given the nickname Unstoppable, and the show Mission Unstoppable was born in part as a result of that. And the great American poet Theodore Roethke said, "The world needs more people who specialize in the impossible." And my guest today, Jordan Mathews, is truly, I think, the poster child for what that looks like. Jordan's a husband, a father of two, boy and a girl. Lucky guy. He's been a model, actor, stripper for a night, he tells us. For over a decade, he's worked as hard as a film finance executive and producer, raising millions to finance films and projects today. And he's a business trial lawyer and a litigation partner at Weinberg Gonzer. And he is also the author of Failure. When you have nothing, you have everything. Jordan believes in the truth, in loyalty, yoga, cold showers, and chaos. And he wants to make sure that his kids learn to fail so they can succeed. So let's welcome Jordan Mathews to Mission Unstoppable.
Thank you. Yeah, that's pretty comprehensive. You threw some stuff in there that I didn't realize was going to go in, but that's all good.
I love it. I love it. So, you know, I bet a lot of people look at you and they think, wow, life's been easy. You've got looks, you've got money, you're young, you're successful. Except for, you know, the looks part, nothing else came easy to you. In fact, I think you paid a maximum price for a lot of everything that you have. I think that's true. You can let me know. I think that your lessons weren't slaps on the wrist, so I think that they were definitely a little bit more than that. Sometimes brutal.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate the looks thing. There are people who are far better looking than me. I'm an okay looking person,
Looks
but
relative.
I did not have like some major. I mean, that was just like a blip, and actually that happened because I was, you know, kind of breaking in at the time, and someone just, you know, suggested, hey, this is a way someone else has broken in, and so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go off in that direction. I'm going to see what I can do and get an agent and, you know, whatever. And so I did some stuff, but it was nothing, you know, phenomenal. I was not like some, you know, guy on billboards and so, yeah, but appreciate the nod there. 100%. I mean, back to your point. I mean, look, my perspective is life is life. Everyone has challenges. They come in different shapes and sizes, for lack of a better term. Everyone's got stuff. Everyone's gone through, you know, raising kids, losing a parent, going through a divorce, you know, bankruptcy, losing businesses, you know, having some successes, you know, I mean, cancer, illness, you know, the death of a spouse, all that stuff. Obviously, not everyone's had all of those experiences, but the point is that you can talk to anyone on the street, and anyone is going to have that you're going to talk to is going to have one of those things going on, or many of them, often at a time. Some people are in a situation, obviously, where it's like they are in a conflux or where so much is basically going on at the same time, and that can happen. That's a part of life. But I mean, I guess my perspective, and appreciate the acknowledgement of even being, you know, considered a part of this conversation. I don't necessarily think that I'm a poster child, but I appreciate, I guess, the consideration there is, look, we're all human beings, but it's a mindset. And I think I was very fortunate. I mean, there's a nature nurture perspective, right? It's like, okay, well, are you born this way, or do you become this way because of like the culture and, you know, people around you and stuff like that? And obviously I think both are significant, because it's really interesting, because if I look back at my entire life, I would say, well, I could look back pretty analytically and say, you know, I worked really hard. I remember there was a situation where I was not really a great student in elementary school, and I would joke with my mother. I put this in my book. I would joke with my mother. I'd come home and, like, you're in fourth grade. Big deal is like, do you do well on a test or something like that? Sure. And so I would joke with her. She said, how's your day? Oh, I failed a test. Ha ha ha. And then we'd joke around, and I was like, I'm just joking. Wasn't really a great student. And I had this really tough teacher my fourth grade year. Her name was Mrs. Hess, and she was like considered like the hardest teacher, definitely in that grade, if not in school. And you often can learn the most from those people, obviously. And so I didn't study. I didn't prepare for this one exam, and I got like a 63%. Like I got a D, you know, or an F, whatever, D minus. And it was like, for me at that point, as like a 10-year-old, I was like, oh my God, what is this? Right. It was me, the equivalent of, losing $1 million or whatever later on or something. And I was like shocked. You have a physiological shock to it. And so I came home and my mom was like, how was your day? And I kind of hesitantly was like, I got a D on a test. And she kind of knew the game. She knew the routine. And I insisted, I'm like, no, I got a D on a test. She knew the routine, didn't buy it. I'm like, no. She kind of started to sense that something was a little up. And my mother was incredibly accepting, incredibly supportive, amazing human being, self-made entrepreneur. As a single mom, my father was an incredible person as well, both great people. But she was a self-made woman and really an awesome, incredible role model. Not very judgmental, but when she realized that I was serious, she gave me this look. And I don't know that it probably wasn't intentional. It wasn't something that was very common, but it was a look of like, that's not a good thing, right?
Yeah.
For better or worse, and this kind of goes back to the nature nurture conversation, I've never forgotten that look. And I went back in the next quarter, I think I got like a B plus and a B and the rest A's. Next one, I think I got like one B or a B plus and the rest A's. Then the next quarter, the rest A's. And I ended up being the valedictorian of the school. I was so motivated by that one thing. Now, I'm not saying that that's a good thing, but I definitely learned a little bit about my character. And if I look back analytically at different points in my life, usually I've responded similarly regardless of the platform. And it's not that I'm necessarily smarter than someone else. I mean, I'm reasonably intelligent, but there's people out there who can do wonders around me, can run circles. But I actually remember watching a 60 Minutes interview years ago. I think it was when Will Smith was promoting the movie The Pursuit of Happiness.
Yeah.
And he's doing this interview and he said in so many words, he was like, you might be smarter than me, you might be better looking than me, you might be more talented than me, you might have more money than me. He's like, but when you're sleeping, I'm working, right? When you're at dinner with your family, I'm working, right? When you're on vacation, I'm working. I guarantee that you will not outwork me in any way, shape, or form. And it's not only just that work.
Yes.
Work is one thing. Work is, like showing up is a huge, huge aspect of it. But it's the ability, and it goes back to the failure concept that I wrote about in the book, which was largely just inspired from a lesson that I learned in life. It is not just showing up and working hard. And not everyone has to do this, but it's certainly an ideal to live up to, I think, it's the resilience. It's the ability to going back to everyone's got stuff. Everyone has a loss. Everyone has multiple losses and difficult times in life. How do you approach that? Right? Do you approach it and do you see the loss? Do you play the victim? Do you think, that, you're the only one in this situation and you can't get out of bed? I mean, I can honestly say there are many days when I wake up in the morning and I'm feeling heavy. Like I'm feeling like it's difficult to get up, but there's something in me that just says, look, you have two options,
right.
Two options. You either sit there or you get up. The situation is not going to change unless you change it. So you either sit there or you get up and go do something. And you can, you are the co-author effectively of your world, right? And you make certain decisions that will affect your reality. So what I learned was, and the whole concept of failure was, I guess it's a play on words, or maybe that's not the right way of saying it, but it wasn't about failure. It was about success and the process of success, and saying, I know this is a kind of a cliche. We've all heard this, but it was me trying to take a step back and say, hey, look, you may see me and you may say, hey, look, I'm a partner at a law firm in Los Angeles. I handle, certain types of law. I've been in the entertainment industry for like 2 decades. I've, put together $600 million in financing deals, but I also was in partnership disputes and got stuck in my business partner's divorce and lost nearly everything and was on the verge of bankruptcy, had 2 kids, had to go back and get multiple degrees while having kids and taking out hundreds of thousands of dollars in law school loans and putting myself in a position where I still had to provide for a family and take care of a family while doing that.
Yeah.
I lost businesses before.
Wait, I'm going to stop you for a second. You're just like, oh, and
I'm going. Sorry.
And it's like, well, yeah, let's just talk about $600 million of loss. And most people would be going, their jaws on the floor going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my
Sure.
God, what am I going to do? Right? Like, it's a lot of money. That's a
Mhm.
lot. It's a lot of loss. And it's a lot. I mean, you had something like 45 personal securities that you signed off, like you're going to pay this money back regardless.
Well, so yeah, so I don't want to misrepresent anything. I want to be very clear about what the context of what that was. So the initial thing was I had in the middle of financial crisis, I had started as an actor. I'd moved out from New York and I started in theater, came out to LA and decided I was going to pursue acting, right? And got a manager, I wasn't in the union. I started trying to do stuff. And for lack of a better term, my perspective was I just saw a lot of the blind leading the blind.
Yeah.
So it's a long story, but cutting to the chase, I I actually met this person who just advised me to do some marketing, and I put together like postcards, and I signed up for this thing called Studio System, which was like a big the yellow book pages really that studios use to track projects. And I came up and I developed a whole system of contact information for people involved in projects that I thought I was correct for. Producers, casting directors, not knowing anyone. And so I'd write them a message and I had them on a list to go out like every 6 weeks. And I got maybe 20 meetings out of that, out of just under 6,000 messages that went out over about 12 months, right?
Yep.
Bombed every single one of them because I was constantly rejected, right?
Yep.
What have you done? Who are you?
I gotta stop you again because this is really important. People who are going to listen to this need
Sure.
to understand, because I teach this a little bit, and it's maybe you get a 1% response.
Yep.
And you put game into it. So as a coach, I would go, okay, you're going to have 9 no's and maybe 1 yes. 9
Correct.
no's and yes. So you just go check, no, yes, okay. And
Yep.
you can't let those put you down. They have to be like water, like a duck, water off the back.
Mhm.
And just speaking of a duck, it was interesting because this morning I think I had like 3 pages left to read in your book, but I went on LinkedIn first. For some reason, I went on LinkedIn. I had a message, and there was Angela Duckworth's TED Talk on perseverance and on exactly what you wrote in your book on
Sure.
your last page of talking about success and what it takes, and it takes grit. And
Mhm.
I think that nature versus nurture, I think you have the nature,
Mhm.
but you nurture the grit. I think you have to kind of be that. And so people are listening, they're thinking, oh, I can't do that. No, you can't. Even if you didn't have his mother or father or whatever it is, the upbringing, sure. I think that you can nurture that, but it's inside you. So not everybody would have gotten that book, would have taken the time to write to those people and had those no's and kept doing it for a year, going, oh, nothing's happening. I'm not getting anything. Nobody loves me, but you have to do it. That's the work. That's the grit.
Yeah.
That's the tenacity. That's, you holding the faith because you know that you get to lead and choose the life you want to live. And I think that's what's important. Is that
absolutely. I think a really interesting thing to think about, though, I will say this is, I've had jobs in my life. My first job was working as a quote unquote sandwich artist at Subway, right? When I was in high school, worked as a busboy, sold Cutco knives in college, like, all that stuff. Yeah. The one thing that I would say that's a distinction is, look, when you're doing something that you find that inspires you, and you have purpose, you have meaning, you have something that is driving you, to do something. And look, ego can drive you too. And I've had ego drive me 100%. So I'm not saying that is not a part of it. There was definitely a chip on my shoulder. I want to prove myself mentality. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be, you got to be careful with it. But it's normal, especially when I think you're trying to prove yourself and trying to make a name for yourself. But if you connect that with meaning and what is your overall purpose, that's the thing. That's like the gasoline. That's the fuel that allows you to be working at 1 o'clock in the morning and you don't feel like you're working, right? Yeah. As opposed to getting up for a job. And so that's, I think, a big thing that people should be aware of in the context of perseverance, because you can have perseverance, but you got to have something, that through line that's really driving you. And at least that's what I found for myself. I mean, there has always been, it's been hard. Work is difficult. You deal with a lot of things that are challenging. But it's always something that I'm creating myself.
Right.
So,
and I think that you are not happy unless it's a great challenge. I mean, you did 3 years of law school in 1 year, and then decided to take a master's at the same time, because I'll just get my master's. Why not?
well,
I'm doing this really hard thing, then I'm just going to do this too, because if it didn't have the icing and the cherry on the top, it's just normal.
So, well, yeah. So slight adjustment. So kind of correct, but a little. So what happened was, when my businesses collapsed and I had to move out of my house, turn in my car, had a daughter. Shortly after we were pregnant with my son, I was applying to law school. I applied and I had to take the LSAT, and I had one shot and no money at that time. I mean, everything dried up, closed my businesses, had to figure that out, significant credit card debt, all that stuff. And I had to take the LSAT, and basically I had only completed 2 years of college because I left college after 2 years. Right. And so I had to petition this one school in order to get in. And basically the requirements were I had to hit a certain percentile on the LSAT. I had to have at least 2 years of college, and I had to be, I think they said like 35 years old, which I wasn't at the time. And I think the reason for that was they thought, well, if you're not 35, you should go back and finish college before you go to law school.
Right.
I didn't have the time to do that. I have a family to provide for and all that stuff. So I petitioned them. I explained all the business that I had done. I explained all the companies I owned, the people I worked with, to give perhaps some credibility to it. I hit the percentile on the LSAT, and they gave me a bit of a scholarship at that time, and they allowed me in. Within 2 weeks, I was still having a hard time letting go of my companies. I wasn't sure if I was going to do this and get this education to supplement what I was still doing. I was still doing film finance, or was I actually going to practice? And it was so hard for me to let go of anything that I had built. I was like, that's one thing I don't do. I don't quit. Right. So I had to make a pivot though. And I realized after about maybe 2 weeks, I'm going to practice. But then I realized I was at one of the worst law schools in the country, not because my credentials were bad or my LSAT was low. It was because I didn't have a college degree. So I had limited options. So I realized I had to transfer. So I didn't complete 3 years of law school in 1 year. What I did was, during my first year of law school, I went back and completed 2 years of my college degree at the same time as my first year of law school, finished with a 3.9 college GPA, finished at the top of my class in law school. My son was born during the first semester, like right as the final exams were, I mean, we were in the hospital and all that stuff. So that was added pressure to that.
Sure.
But it was, if I don't hit this and if I don't transfer, because I was at such a low ranked school, I wouldn't even be able to transfer. And I had to transfer because, with respectfully, that school was like having a scarlet letter on my resume. Immediately, no one would answer my call because they're like, oh, we don't.
E-school for lawyers.
Yeah. So it's like, they're not going to take you seriously. And so I fortunately did. I transferred to Pepperdine University. It was a very reputable school and very good school. There were 3 other schools I applied to UCLA, USC, Loyola. And even though I had a letter of recommendation from the general counsel for the Lakers, who was my former lawyer, like I had a letter of recommendation from Tiger Woods' attorney. Like I had stuff from what I had done. These were my lawyers, and these were people who worked with me and knew me, and still got rejected, right? And got into Pepperdine. I had a resume showing that I had negotiated $3 billion in financing deals. I don't think many people applying to law school necessarily had that on their resume.
Yeah, probably not.
Didn't get accepted. But anyways, so then I transferred to Pepperdine. I had 2 years left of my law degree. I finished that in like a year and a half, and then did a master's degree on top of that, and then kind of went from there. So
you graduated. I think you graduated November. December. The law firm that you were working with said we're not going to be able to make you happy here. You're just too much of a go-getter, I guess, for them. And then come January, you're at your firm that you're with right now at Weinberg.
So yeah, so I finished, full disclosure, right? So, like I finished early so that I could take the bar in February, right? Because they offer the bar 2 times a year. So I finished my law degree in December of 2016. I was still finishing my master's degree, which I was going to get in May. The bar exam was scheduled for February. So I graduated early, took like massive credits to do all this stuff, overloaded my credits because I just had to get back out into the world. And my sister-in-law was living with us at the time. My nephew was living with us. I had my 2 kids, financially strained, trying to study for the bar exam, kids in the house, all the stuff that comes with that.
Wife doing it at this point. What is she doing?
She was a stay-at-home mom, which is very tough. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was
her outlook, her whole, is she nervous? Is she calm? Is she
100%? No, I mean, it was not a comfortable time. It was a very, pressure cooker time period on all fronts.
Yeah.
And so I think, for some people, they don't like that. For me, I found that I do function well in those high pressure situations. But everyone got strep throat in my house a week before. I had to leave. I went to this motel, which was a disgusting place, for like a night, and then went to my friend's 1-bedroom apartment and slept on the couch there for like a week while I finished studying. This was like crunch time. Took the bar exam, felt great about it, waited like 2.5 months. And then long story short, I found out I didn't pass it. So I was like, I lost my attorney salary for the year that I was expecting. Like, I was going to have to go back and find a way to pay someone to train me or get ready for this exam. I took like another loan on a credit card that I really didn't have access to and all that stuff. And went back under, I couldn't get out of bed for like 4 days. I was so depressed about the situation, but went back, prepped aggressively, all that stuff, went back, passed it, obviously. And then I was now negotiating with my firm that I was at. And I decided to give them a portfolio of everything that I worked on, everything I had done. And I was like, this is going to go 1 of 2 ways. Like, I had a family and I needed to provide for my family. I was no longer trying to take huge risks. But then there was like that same itch, that same burn that was like, I gotta be me. Like, I can't play small. Like, right. I'll play the game, but I gotta be myself. Like, I'm not just, I can't fit this mold that they want me to be. So you're either going to see this as an opportunity that I can build your firm, or you're going to not, but I gotta figure this out one way or the other, because if it's the wrong fit, then I gotta know now. Basically, it didn't go the right way. And they called me in like 4 days before Christmas, handed me a check for like a little over $3,000 in LA. I couldn't cover my rent. Yeah. And I had nothing. And they said, we don't think we're going to be a good fit for you. Or we don't think we're going to be able to make you happy. And I was like, I just passed the bar after going through all that stuff. We had been at this firm for a year, was planning on starting to build my career here. And I was out. Within 2 weeks, I negotiated an arrangement with this other firm that I had a relationship with, that I was introduced to someone. Actually, someone reached out to me on LinkedIn when I was in law school, and they saw my background and they wanted to meet me. And we met and we connected and we built a great relationship. He was a professional. He was actually just a financial advisor, and we had good relationships and all that stuff. I introduced him to some people. He introduced me to some people. And one person he introduced me to was a guy named Ty Gonzer, who was at my firm, Weinberg Gonzer. And so I spent like 1.5 years building the relationship with Ty. And as of like January of I think it was like 2018, I set myself up there. But I had to, then it was a completely different situation. I wasn't an employee. I had to build a book of business. So it was not like, here's a salary, here's some work. It was, here's the firm, figure it out, sink or swim.
Yeah. Well, you knew how to do that.
Well, I had to.
Yeah. But you'd done it for yourself before. I mean, you raised all that money before. And I think what's interesting, I look back at my father, who was a very successful businessman, in the 80 recession in California, he had an investment in a mall project that went belly up. He refused to go bankrupt. Everybody else took off, but he would never ever go bankrupt. And now he's like 75, 80 years old.
Yeah.
Starts again. And the thing is, when you know how to make money, you know how to make money. When you know you can be successful, you know how to be successful.
Sure.
And there's no going back. I mean, people who know it in their head, it's like, I can do this. I can do this. You're one of those people. I can do this. I know how to do this. And I think that is key. You know, that like Andrea even said in her TED Talk, it's the brain. When the brain knows that it can do that, and our brain, is like a servo meter, and it recognizes, I've done something similar, I can do it again. Subconsciously, you do it. Yeah. And I think that's really important too, that, that's why even little successes help us have big successes.
They do. They absolutely do. And, it's interesting. I've seen it as a parent. Like I look at like my kids and I see my son in particular, and it's interesting. He's 8 years old. You have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. And it's a really interesting thing because like, you see things in them and you're like, oh, like they're a different person. They're not you.
Right.
But, there is something to the saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So like you can look at certain characteristics and say, well, you probably got that from somewhere else maybe, or whatever. But that's definitely something that I align with or that I see. And so, I mean, look, you can call it whatever you want. I mean, there's a stubborn nature to who I am. Like, I try to be reasonable. I try to be workable. I try to be sensible, but I'm also like very principled, and so it's like I have a decent sense, I think, of what's right or wrong, and I try to keep myself in check and think, well, look, I have a perspective on something, but that's just my perspective. Like, is my perspective off? But if it truly is on point, I will pretty stubbornly push that forward and continue with that. And I see that in my son, for example. And so like, it's an interesting, but you got to be careful of how you nurture that, right? Because that, because it's that saying, the fire that can cook you dinner can also, burn your house down.
Right.
So
you alluded in the book about, treating them a little bit differently, your daughter and your son. What difference would you say you treat them?
Well, I don't treat them differently based on one being like my daughter and one being my son. I treat them differently because they're different people, like, and they do things differently. So usually I had a conversation with someone who is an incredible person and very reputable person. And he said he has a son who's a lawyer, daughter's a doctor. And the saying, or what he said to me, was something like, my kids will be the first to tell you that if we do something wrong, my dad will be the first person lowering my head into the police car.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so the point is it's, you don't judge the person, you judge the conduct. At least that's how I look at it. So, I mean, look, I acknowledge there are inherent, nuances to relationships, right? A father looking over my daughter, like looking at my daughter, I am much more protective and mindful of, in my view, and I don't think it's incorrect, I'm the first male in her life. I mean, obviously. So she will gauge her relationships, based off of that, and it'll be influenced based off of that. So how I treat her, how I act with her is heavily influenced by how I look at that, that dynamic.
And the future of her. Yeah. I mean, I'm a lot older than you, and so it's a different era, but my dad was the first person to say, you can do and be anything that you want. And as far as I know, he never lied to me. So I believed him. And I had many jobs that were male, I was first female only. And people say, oh, you can't do that. I go, yeah, I can.
Yeah.
And they go, how did you get that? I go, because I knew I could. Like, it's just a mindset, right? But the one thing I said to him that he did not do was he made the boys pay for their cars. He made the boys pay for this and that. And he didn't make me for it. And I said, you did me a disservice. You did me a disservice on that one. I mean, I was 16.
Sure.
But, 25-year-old me was like, you did me a disservice. I wish I had to do that.
What was his response? Did he have a response to that?
This little girl, right? I was the only girl.
Right.
But, and maybe he thought somebody would come along and marry me and take care of me or whatever the case is. Fathers always kind of want that. But
what's interesting? I don't want to cut you off, obviously, but I was going to think there was, part of it could be generational, obviously, older generation.
For sure.
But the other thing may have been him fulfilling a part of what he identified with as being, a father and a man, of saying, I want to provide this for my daughter.
Exactly. Oh yeah, I totally get it.
And the thing is with a son, not to say that it's right or wrong, but he may have been looking at it, I certainly do with my son, is like, my goal, and I look at it with both kids actually, is my perspective is like, my job is not to give them things. My job is to give them the character, or to facilitate tools that teach them something and show them character, so that they have the ability to withstand failure and pressure and pain, and can still move forward in life. Because I see plenty of people, I say I don't have a judgment, and I don't in one sense, but I perhaps do in another sense, because everyone's going to make their own choice, free will. You're going to do what you're going to do. But I see plenty of people who, it's not that they're not doing something, it's that something happened at some point in their life. And if I listen to them talk, it's interesting because they will often revert back to that moment. That was like the stopping point, and they never moved on from then, and they never will move on from then. And so you just got to kind of like think about that, like what, you need to determine and have the ability. Like, look, I talked to someone professionally, like, because you got to do that. You have to, or I think it's a good thing to do. I think, I don't want to get mentally stuck somewhere. So it's like, I think you need to know when you need help, and you need to know, it's obviously important to try to develop good people around you who you can trust, with that stuff. But
I mean, they blame everything except for themselves, which is kind of fun. But people often have dream killers around them, which I call dream killers. The people, I don't tell people what I'm going to do a lot of the time, because I know they don't understand it. They don't understand what it's going to take for the success of that, because they can't even think that they could do that. And so it's really, you don't say anything, and you just go ahead and you do what you're going to do. And I think that's a little bit easier. But just going back to my dad just for one sec, when I said that the disservice, and I said it in a light way, really, because I became unstoppable. But it would have been good if he had made me do that. It just would have built a little bit more character, I think, in that. Would have made some things easier, I think, if he had made.
So I was watching, this is kind of funny. I was having a conversation with my uncle actually this morning about this. There's a Chris Rock special on Netflix, and I was watching it the other night. I was just kind of long day, kind of relaxing. I was watching it, and he was, obviously he says some stuff that's, kind of hot button and whatever. But one thing that he said was, he was talking about his daughter being in high school, and he was kind of joking about like where he went on like a family or like a school trip. He's like, we went to Disney World, and we had to like take a bus that, for 3 days down to Florida, and we didn't even end up there. We ended up in Alabama and blah, blah, blah. And then he's talking, he's like, my daughter goes to this great school, and her trip is to Portugal. Right. And like, so he's talking about that. And then he says this incident happened where his daughter and a couple girls left while they were in Portugal and went out, got drunk, and, got in trouble. And so he's like, and this school didn't mess around, they expelled them and all that stuff. He's like, but this is, a well-to-do school, and the parents weren't going to take that. And so they all hired lawyers, and even the parents who were lawyers hired lawyers. And he's joking and all that stuff. And he said he came home one day, walks into the house, and sees his daughter out in the back, I think talking to one of her friends, and she's laughing. This is while she's like kind of temporarily like suspended from school. she's laughing. He comes out and he's like, I don't know. I think I'm telling you, the story's pretty accurate, or should be. He sees her laughing. He's like, what are you laughing about? What's so funny? And she's like, oh, Dad, like, I'll be back in school in no time, relax, or whatever. And he said that, it's funny I said it, but he's like, I turned around, I walked through the house, out of the house, got in my car, drove over to the school, got the head of the school, went into his office, and I said, look, I know you're under a lot of pressure. I know you are dealing with lawyers. I know you're dealing with all that stuff. Like, they had even hired a lawyer and all that stuff because his ex-wife wanted him to do it and whatever, and they're putting pressure. He's like, I know you're dealing with all that stuff right now, but I need you to kick my daughter out of school. I need you to kick her out of school. Whatever you do, that's all I need from you, right? And so he finishes the conversation. He leaves, and he said it as though it happened the same day, but I don't know if it did. And he's like, came home, phone rings, and he's like, hey, whatever his daughter's name was, you should go get that. So she goes over the phone, gets it, and he just like kind of waits patiently as he hears like her heart sink, or her reaction. She comes over and says, I got kicked out of school, Daddy. Like, and then she had to apply to new schools. And in those applications, she had to disclose that this happened. She had to explain why it wouldn't happen again when she applied to college. She had to explain what happened. She had to explain why it wouldn't happen again. And he's like, now that happened 3 years ago. My daughter's now in culinary school in Paris, and I'm so proud of her. And she's such a good person and like a good citizen, effectively. And then he jokingly was like, and none of them know that any of this happened, and they won't even know about this until they actually see this Netflix special or whatever, like the lawyer, the wife, and all that stuff, right? Which is kind of funny. But the point is that he, took the approach of like, you need to learn your lesson. Like, you need to be accountable, you need to be responsible, and you need to be humbled, right? That's a huge.
It's hard as a parent. You don't want to do that to your child, but you have to. My son got kicked out of school, and I went to school. I said, do you think this is a party for him to be on a 3-day vacation?
Right.
They can come back and clean toilets or something. Come on. Like, that's a punishment. Sitting home, watching video because I'm at work. I'm not there. Right. That's a party. Like, that's not even, that's nothing. So he's absolutely right. What he did, it was great. I love that. And more parents should really understand that you have to love them enough to do it. Right. You have to love them. And even as they're hating, I hate you. No. But my son came to me, one of my sons said, hey, Mom, you know what? He was 12. He goes, my friends don't know how to do laundry. Isn't that stupid? My friends don't know how to do this. Isn't that stupid? And I'm like, well, unfortunately for them, they're not going to be self-sufficient like you are. It's really a perception and perspective that we do. But I think that your mother, being a working mother, there was something on the news the other day that said children of working mothers are more successful than children of stay-at-home mothers. And I used to think, well, stay-at-home mom, but I guess they see. And even like when my kids were young, I volunteered. My son he was in hockey and he wanted to play hockey in the summer. So I started a rollerblade team and league. And he never forgot that. He goes, you got involved in everything. And now I see them getting involved with their kids and doing things, right? And I think we show by example. We do. And I think,
it is interesting because my my mother, we were very close. She was a single parent. I was the only child. Passed away about 10, 11 months ago, unexpectedly. She was young. She was only 70. And I mean, she was within age that things can happen, but it wasn't. And I was aware that she was aging, and so I was like, I think I'm like in that 5 to 10 year range, but I wasn't, expecting it at all, or I wasn't expecting it. I don't think that's actually correct. I wasn't expecting it, but I was cognizant that, like, look, life happens.
She wasn't ill.
She had some. I mean, she had some health issues. She had a stent that was put in her 50s. And obviously that's supposed to resolve the issue. I don't know what happened. Fortunately, and I've debated this with a lot of people. She just went to sleep that night. And I think that she probably had a stroke or a heart attack. I'm not sure. Because if there's not like a serious question, they don't necessarily do an autopsy. So they didn't do that.
She was living with somebody, or she was remarried, your mom?
No, she was by herself. She was by herself. So what happened was I had a really intense day that Friday, which is September 23rd, I believe. And I talked to her every day. I would talk to her multiple times a day. We'd stay in touch. And my family and I were going glamping, for the weekend.
Yeah.
And so they left early because I was stuck handling some emergencies. And so they left, and I knew I couldn't leave because wouldn't have reception where we were going to go for work. And this was like a very time sensitive issue. And so I remember calling her that night when I was on the way, and I had a 3.5-minute conversation. And, she seemed a bit stressed out. There were things that, we talked about. And I would constantly try to encourage her. I mean, she was rebuilding her business. She had always been like at the top of her business and all that stuff. And, things change over time. And so we were dealing with some of that stuff. And then she texted me and said, hold on just one moment.
Jordan's having a moment. He'll be.
So sorry, I got pulled away for a quick second. Someone walked in. I had to answer something. So I had texted her and said, hey, look, when I'm there, she texted me and she said, have a great time with your family and your work. Or I hope you can get some work done because I was always constantly working and managing and having a family. And I texted her and said, if you don't hear from me, I'll be okay, because I knew I was going to have a reception issue. And so when I got there, it was 9:27 p.m. I remember, or I got there, and at 9:27 p.m., which is 12:37 a.m. her time, because she was on East Coast, I was on West Coast. I texted her and said, I'm here, love you. And I think she just wrote back like, okay, thanks, or okay, cool. She was just happy I was there. And so to your question of whether she was, living with anyone or whatever, I didn't talk to her on Saturday because I didn't have any reception. And so I was with my family. We were hiking and doing all that stuff. I didn't talk to her. And then on Sunday, I decided to leave early and go back to LA to get some work done. I had an arbitration coming up. I had a filing and all kinds of stuff that was due. And all of a sudden, as I left, like my phone started to get reception, right? So, messages started coming in, text messages that were kind of stuck, just kind of popped up. And so I had two messages, and one was from a woman who was a friend. Her name is Anne in Pittsburgh, where my mother lived. And she never really contacted me. And another was from a number that I didn't recognize at first. And I had these two messages. And long story short, I listened to the messages and realized that they had both been trying to get a hold of her and couldn't. Right. And so I immediately, it was a very surreal moment. Like, I'm just driving home. Like, was just with my family. I'm going to go get some work done. And all of a sudden, just this like bomb just goes off. Like, I don't know what the answer is here, but I know my mother, and she responds right away. Like, that's just her personality. That's her MO. And so anyways, it was about a 45-minute process of me calling uncles who were there, end up calling the police, having someone sent to the house, and I had to just wait and wait. And my uncle was there, and then he basically let the police in. They wouldn't let him in because they wanted to check the house. And I waited. I got off the phone. I called my other uncle who I'd been on the phone with in Philly. And as I'm talking to him, I said, the longer this takes, that's not a good sign. Like, you go in, you find her, like, she, oh, hey, maybe she's taking a nap or whatever the case is. And my biggest concern had been, God forbid, did she fall? Like, what if, she's sitting there waiting? And one of the really important points is that the 2 messages that I got, one of them had said that they had been trying to get a hold of her since 10 a.m. the prior morning. So on that Saturday, so this was Sunday. On that Saturday, when I couldn't get a hold of her, they were saying that they had been trying to get a hold of her since 10 a.m. Saturday. And I had spoken to her. The last text to me was 12:27 a.m. Saturday morning. Right.
Yeah.
So that was incredibly uncharacteristic. And I just knew. So it seems that when I texted her, like when she went to sleep, like, I don't know exactly what happened, but I assume that, that's probably sort of what unfolded. So the reason I say that is, in terms of the interesting life experiences and lessons there was, we were very close, and I still have to be a parent. I still have to have a career. I still have to do all those things and, kind of jump into, managing the stuff that comes with that. But it was also an interesting experience because it was very sudden. So it was more difficult, I guess, perhaps for me, especially because of our close relationship and not having the finality that I wanted. I actually ended up, I wear her ashes on a necklace. But then I think to myself, people would say to me, like, it's a blessing that she didn't,
No.
well, that she didn't, like, suffer, like that
Right.
she didn't, and all that stuff. And I struggled with it because I was like, I just wanted the opportunity to kind of say goodbye to her.
Yeah.
But I think about, like, if she had a stroke and if she'd survived it and she was kind of incapacitated and I had to put her into a hospital or a place where she would not have wanted to be.
Yeah.
Right. And just sort of watch her go through that process.
Yeah.
It would have not been the right way to go. But I always know that, what she taught me in life, right, and the person that she was she was such a beacon of light and hope and love and support. And so she's very much so filled me with that. So, that's never left me.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wrote a book about my dad. I got to interview him before he died, thankfully. But we didn't expect him to die. He was 97. I never expected him to die. Like, I really still didn't expect him to die when he did. It was very sudden because he got an infection in his gut, and that was it.
Yeah.
But on to other topics. Let's talk about the RICO case. Let's talk about Mr. Wynn, who everybody wants to know about, I'm sure, because that was a big, no pun. Yeah, it was a pun, win, unwin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So you became a new lawyer, and that's your first case. Is that your first case?
I don't know if it was my first case. It was one of them, and it may have been. It was like one of, like, the first, like, 2 cases or something like that. Yeah.
How did you get that case?
Well, because of my prior relationships and everything that I had kind of built, I had very specific relationships in the entertainment space and could get referrals and get calls and whatnot. I mean, there are certain things that sort of coincided with the Wall Street Journal report that came out in January of 2018 that I'm not really able to fully go into, but I was very conscious and aware of the different mechanisms that were going on. And actually, so one of the things is when I financed the first film, to give it a little context, that ended up in extensive litigation because the Russian distributor breached a holdback clause and powered the movie all over the world. And I had to hire an attorney. And I was introduced to this business partner, and he introduced me to a guy named Michael Holtz, who was a senior partner at Laidley and Singer. And they were basically the preeminent entertainment litigation firm in the country. I mean, they were Cosby's first lawyers, Brad Pitt, Travolta, Stallone,
Right.
anyone like that. And so Mike was my attorney on that matter. And so we, handled it and ended up resolving it at a mediation. But when I ended up a couple of years later going back to law school, I reconnected with him and we stayed in touch, and he became a mentor, and we've built a very, strong relationship and business working relationship together. So yeah, that was one of the first major cases that came up, and I became lead counsel. And I'll very candidly say this. I mean, look, one of the things that I also knew how to do is, I knew how to creatively navigate situations. So I was in a situation where I had to build a career, right? And where I had the opportunity to really take on a tremendous case. And to me, it wasn't just a case. It was like, I'm going to go all the way on this. But I also had the added benefit is I knew that I had a new license, and I knew that they would look me up. The first thing they would do is look me up, and they'd think, you don't know anything.
Yep. A baby.
Yeah, you're a baby. You don't know anything. And what I had sort of in my back pocket was I was like, great, be unassuming. Know that. What you don't know is you don't know what I've actually done, as a CEO, as an executive,
and how far you're willing to go.
And how far I will go.
Yeah.
And so, it played out over 5 years. It went up, it's gone back, there's been obviously massive fines, and it recently ended up with a $10 million fine against Wynn, which was connected to a case by the Nevada Gaming Control Board against Wynn. But all the underlying allegations that were the basis for our cases, we represented the main person who had made the allegations and led to the $7.5 million settlement. It's been a battle, and it's been a good result, all things considered.
It was fascinating to read about all the shenanigans, and it was fascinating to read about how they had put a new team member on their litigation team, which you later found out they were trying to make her the judge of the case, so that they could just wipe that clean, and there was no,
Well, I took that up to the Supreme Court twice. And
right.
argued those issues in different ways in the Ninth Circuit twice.
I don't even know why you would have to argue that twice. It's just so damning.
Well, the reason is
our laws are different, but that is a little bit damning.
Yeah, I mean, the reason is because the way I found the information was when I had filed the case in the district court. We knew that there was a statute of limitations issue, and we had argued a thing called equitable estoppel, meaning you can't rely on statute of limitations if you overtly threaten or induce someone to not sue. And we litigated that extensively in the federal court, and it was interesting because we finished briefing that in December of 2018. We filed in September of 2018, finished briefing it in December of 2018. And for 4 months, it just sat there and there was no decision. But what happened is all of a sudden in January of 2019, all of the reports started coming out from all the investigations that were triggered from the Nevada Gaming Control Board, and then from Massachusetts, where they had admitted the toxic workplace environment and the all the stuff that had gone on. And it was directly related to our arguments. And at that time, we filed what are called requests for judicial notice. So we immediately put it in front of the court, like, this is a public document. You need to consider this in connection with our briefing. Even though the briefing's done, this is new information that wasn't available, and it's directly relevant to the issues. The lead attorney for Wynn Las Vegas at that time started filing motions to strike and started trying to get them out. and we're litigating it back and forth. We're filing motions and briefing back and forth, going back and forth. And it was all leading up to a 3-day public hearing in Massachusetts because they were opening up a $2.6 billion casino in Massachusetts. And our issues and everything related to that had triggered this massive investigation by the Massachusetts Gaming Control Board. And so on April 2nd of 2019, all of a sudden, a notice of appearance gets filed in our case by the office managing partner of their firm. And I'm thinking they're probably just, adding more guns at this point because they're nervous about what we're doing. The same day they file a reply brief. So they filed another document. I didn't notice it at the time, but they had basically removed the other main attorney's name. She had filed everything. She had filed the motion to dismiss. She had filed the motion to strike. She took care. She was lead person on this case. And we ended up filing another request for judicial notice tied to the Massachusetts Gaming Report on like April 15th or 16th. And like within 2 or 3 days on April 18th, they dismissed the case, unilaterally threw it out. So I ended up refiling the state court for the state claims that were still open, filed a notice of appeal to the Ninth Circuit, went through, whatever it was, 8, 9, 10 months of briefing on that, finished the briefing in December of 2019, and we were set for oral argument in March of 2020. So I remember this, I think because it was a leap year, 2020. Yeah. So I think it was February 29th, which doesn't commonly happen. So February 29th, I'm sitting at home and I'm on my laptop and I've got oral argument in like 2.5 weeks. And I started doing some opposition research. I'm just getting ready for oral argument. And I decide, I'm like, I just want to look up some stuff. I had done this before, but it had been a while. And I look up on the website for Wynn Las Vegas's counsel. And I noticed that their main attorney is no longer at the firm. I'm like, that's odd. She probably went somewhere else. Where did she go? What other firm did she go to? I look her up and I realize that she's been appointed as a judge in the Nevada District Court where we were litigating. Like, that's really interesting. Then I realized that she had been appointed to take over the position of the magistrate judge in our case. Mm-hmm. And then I looked at the announcement, and the announcement was May 2018, which was exactly 1 month after our case was dismissed. Well, I've been in the entertainment industry for a long time, and anyone with common sense knows that the announcement doesn't occur on the day that you decide something. You hold an announcement and you announce it when it's appropriate to announce it.
Right.
Okay. So then I went back and looked at all of the timeline of her litigation and the notice of appearance that had been filed on April 2nd. And I realized that the reason why this person had filed a notice of appearance on April 2nd was because their main counsel, who had been litigating the whole time, was basically either selected as the judge or was highly, one of the few people or whatever the case was, and no longer could litigate, right? Could no longer, whatever. And there was no disclosure about this. But then I went back and I found a merit selection panel. So when you select these people, the court appoints a merit selection panel and you become a public official. You're acting on behalf of the U.S. District Court, the United States government, to select, these individuals. And I cross-referenced every name and I came across the name Barbara Buckley. And, the interesting thing there was I looked her up and realized that she was the head of one of the largest foundations in Las Vegas. And she was also the former speaker of the Nevada State Assembly. And I then started looking at her foundation and I noticed that the former general counsel for Wynn Resorts was on her board of directors, right? Who had been ousted in connection with our allegations. I then went through like SEC filings and realized that even though she was removed from the company, she was actually still on, like, the board of directors are still contracted with Wynn through December of 2018, which coincided with the appointment of Buckley onto this panel. But then I literally found a Facebook announcement, of a $500,000 donation from the company to their foundation. And look, there were nuances where they came back and said, we entered into this before. And then I found out that it was structured over time and there was conditional payments. We went back and forth on this litigation. But the reason why I was addressed, and there's a lot more to it, why I was addressed twice is because we raised it immediately to the Ninth Circuit in our first case under, basically we argued that there should have been a recusal and all that stuff. So it was a different issue. And, I knew we were in a kind of a precarious situation because we were basically going to judges, questioning, one of their own effectively. And the optics didn't look great, but I was like, look, the facts are the facts. So it is what it is. I got to present this and whatever. And look, a lot of people.
And there's a history in his background of manipulation and hence the RICO charges and.
Yep. Yeah. There's a lot. So, that's where it really came from is, long story short, I ended up doing like a long 10-month investigation, which led to a RICO filing. But that was precipitated by the fact that part of my investigation was there had been prior RICO cases against them. And I realized really the way that they seemed to be doing business. And look, we had an uphill battle and lost over and over and over again in court, because they were not, there's certain technicalities tied to it. So that's true. And that's accurate. But I think that one of the biggest challenges was the optics of it. It's a tough situation. But nevertheless, the coinciding pressure of all of these things has ultimately resulted in a very good result that we're very pleased with. So it's part of the process.
Congratulations on that. And we are out of time, unfortunately, because I got so much I could talk to you about and ask you about. But it's been a real pleasure talking with you, and all the best in your future. I'm just going to take this off Facebook right now. But thank you again, Jordan. And really, folks, if you've been listening and watching, look it up and read the book. The book is called what is Failure?
It's Failure. When you have nothing, you have everything.
There you go. Get the book. It's a very interesting story. You got a wonderful life story. And I really hope that people do read it and gain something from, watching and learning from you and how you play the game of life. I think it's exactly the way it needs to be played. So well done.
Thanks, Frankie.